I want to start with like a broad question that you guys can answer. How has your jobs changed when we're entering probably what's considered like the platinum age of television? There's so much great television being made. There's so many more outlets for it to be released on. The storytelling has changed in different ways. So just kind of big picture, how has it changed for you guys? And then we'll talk about what you're looking for.
Time zones don't matter anymore. It's just become this non-stoppable. It's just, the fabulous part is, I think we live, as you said, we live in an age of the era of golden television, but equally we live in an age where great content can come from anywhere. And I think that's what I meant. Like this morning I woke up at 6, technically that's 9 in New York and 2 p.m. in the UK. And I noticed all of these missed calls. And there it was. I mean, the day started with someone from the UK, and it was just nonstop. But it was so fabulous because you're engaging with people that have ideas from everywhere.
So just so everyone knows, I work on Crave, but I started off with the traditional pay TV service known as the Movie Network, which out here it was known as Movie Central. So we sort of took over the rest of the country, but it's traditional pay. And, male skew, kind of Cinemax-y content was what really, did well. And then, of course, last November, we ended up rebranding the channel, calling it Crave, and adding it as an add-on to our SVOD service known as Crave. So it's Crave plus movies at HBO, Crave, and then we now also have a Stars product as well, buy-through. And it has totally changed not only just the content that we've noticed that's popping up, but also the way that we schedule, what we're considering in buying. Like MOWs used to sort of more female-skewed MOWs used to do really well. Now on SVOD, they're not really resonating at all. So it's just, every day is sort of a new day where we're, looking at audience and then trying to understand, like, what should we be, looking at. But it's exciting. We find it like a tremendously exciting time, especially to be developing Canadian voices, Canadian stories, because those stories are really resonating. Like Letterkenny is huge and is driving our service. It's fantastic.
Yeah, speak to that, because Letterkenny is actually going to start again. Soon, like next week, on
exactly
the States again. And
yeah.
I remember sort of discovering it up here, probably during this. And then like losing my mind, and then telling I would get all this swag from those guys, and then I'd wear it down there, which I never do, by the way. And then people were like, "What is that show?" And then when it came down there, it's like, "Oh my God, it's huge!" So it's about to explode again. But I think that's a good example of like a voice, a Canadian voice that sort of translates.
Bingo, exactly. And so that's what we're looking for, is now putting our money into content that really speaks to that Canadian identity. It doesn't have to be overtly Canadian necessarily, but we want people to resonate with it. Like, it's a point of distinction on our service. Like, we have HBO, we have Showtime, we have all of this premium content coming, but it's the Canadian piece that is the key for our future.
Yeah, well, for us, we obviously have a history of having a linear broadcast channel, and so over the last couple of years, it's been moving away from just programming a linear channel to programming a streaming service. And what we've found is that the audience appetites for the types of content on those services is very different. Episodic programming works very well, more broad skewing content on broadcast television, but on streaming services, with CBC Gem in particular, there's a lot more of a vast range of content that performs well. Shorter form content does really well for us. Mobile viewers consume at about a 4 times rate relative to other platforms. So we're noticing, I think the big change for us is thinking about the types of things that can work, more serialized. Younger skewing is a really big thing. The TV audience for CBC is a lot older, but our average age on CBC Gem is 10 to 12 years younger, so we're getting a younger audience there. And we just released a new slate of young adult programming for the first time this past summer in July. So you'll see shows like Waragami, which was a partnership with the CW, The 410, which is a really awesome South Asian story that we released in May, and you're going to see continually more shorter form content, or I should say mid-form content, that's really skewing to sort of a young adult audience, and we're getting a lot of uptake in there. And so, for us, Canadian content is obviously the driver for us, the focus. We've commissioned over 50 mid-form scripted series in the last 2 years, and over 100 short docs specifically for GEM. So it's something that we're always looking for, stories from across the country that can tell a unique story. The last thing I'll just say is that one of the greatest benefits, I think, for CBC GEM relative to programming like a linear channel is that you don't have to be as broad in terms of the story you're telling or the lens that you're looking at through the story. We're able to commission stories that are very true and unique and coming from a very specific place that people probably wouldn't take a chance on as a broad proposition. And so it gives us a lot more flexibility to take risks and to work with emerging talent, which is great, because I think for us, developing the next generation of storytellers is a huge priority for us as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess anybody can sort of speak to that, but that's exactly what I've known, and it's happening in the States as well on all the stream services down there, where when you take ratings out of the equation, and it's either a subscription-based model or it's just catering to a younger audience that it wants everything streamed, it also changed how the stories that they wanted told. And I think what you're saying is moving away from this broad-based thing that would appeal to everybody, literally broadcasting, and you would do narrowcasting, but you would be able to tell better stories, whether they were just, niche-driven but smart, or you know what I mean, or just specific to one thing, where those stories were never told in the past because they wouldn't have broad appeal. So what have you seen from what you've been pitched?
Look, I agree that the narrowcasting allows us to get into stories that wouldn't have been told yesterday, right? I'm incredibly proud of a series that we jumped on the bandwagon for earlier this year called There She Goes, which is a very difficult story with David Tennant and Jessica Hines about a set of parents who are dealing with a child who's got developmental learning challenges, right? But I just think that these kinds of stories wouldn't have been told. They've been told for different reasons, but not in the manner that you can. But having said that, I do think that we are challenged, and I think all of us here will be challenged with the fact that there is clutter. How do you break through the clutter? These stories have to find a way to rise above the clutter, and I think that that's all of our challenges together. I mean, I'm sure you are probably you probably have so many shows that you need to critic.
Too many shows, yeah.
So I mean,
It's a great problem to have, right? Because if you find something that can break through, that's great.
Why is it a great problem?
Because I don't know. I mean, I think we've switched into the part where there is no going back. It's like everybody has the same problem. It's the same thing in music. You can. There's millions of bands, and how do they get noticed? How do you can go your whole life and not hear all these amazing bands, and then one day find them? I think that's how it's going to be on television now, where it's just it's so wide and so deep at the same time. I think it's great because if you like stories, you can. I think that there's not an. I would just say that I don't think there's a emergency to watch them now. You can discover them later.
It's interesting. I was having this conversation, I've had it a few times, where when we talk to people about content now, whether like in our personal lives, we're never talking about having seen something or all of something. We're talking about our lists. We're comparing lists of content that we haven't gotten around to watch. And so water cooler talk about the latest episode of XYZ, that's dead. Like that's been gone for a while. I think maybe Game of Thrones or something. And so I understand what you're saying, and I think I do actually miss that. I don't know about others in the room. And to an extent, that's something we're trying to revive. Things we're playing around with is, instead of just releasing all of the episodes of content, we're launching certain seasons as weekly releases in the traditional manner to see, can we sort of recreate that, patience in a streaming environment. So I totally understand that tension, and I think that's how do you cut through the clutter of so many things, even beyond just visual content, is a big challenge. I'll use one example. I think, we think a lot about how do you cut through and tell stories that can tap into the zeitgeist in terms of what's happening. One of the shorts that I shouldn't call them a short, like a mid-form series that we launched in August is a series called Jensplaining, which targets Goop and the whole Gwyneth Paltrow controversial issues there. And it's been one of our top performing series on Gem to date because it's managed to really tap into this narrative that's happening in the zeitgeist, and the author of the book who's featured in the series, she just released a book, and so we released the series around the same time as that, and it's gotten a ton of press. And so I think those are the types of things we have to do to get the attention and cut through the clutter of everything that's happening and all the potential content options.
I agree. I mean, look, we kind of stumped into what I'm going to call as episodic weekly releases because our promise is to bring content that's as close to the UK as possible. So we were releasing it day and date with the UK. And we found what was happening with the audience pattern, how the audience grows week on week, and at what point do you actually see it plateau, right? And I think that's been a great learning experience for us to go, what kinds of audiences come into live programming versus what's a binge-worthy show? What's the balance?
I think it's just as important to have a good show as great poster art. Like having the right sort of poster art so that on an SVOD service you can like quickly sort of identify it. Like it's really interesting, some of the titles that kind of pop up. It's very exciting in the doc space. I would say that's something that we've noticed. Like, on linear TV, documentaries were really like not watched. Like there's a fantastic Canadian film called Anthropocene that came out last year. It was at TIFF, and we put money into it. It was on our linear service on HBO Canada, and it did okay. But then on Crave, it was huge. Like it did extraordinarily well. So we're finding, like, not only do you have to sort of merchandise it properly and sort of treat this content properly in product, but we also have to be very aware of these sort of segments and basically on SVOD we have it's a different audience, totally different audience than the linear TV audience. So it's exciting, and we're learning, like I said earlier, like daily, who that audience is, and are they underserved? If they're underserved, what do we need to create for them?
I mean, I have a thing that I like to say. SVOD is about access, discovery, and community. It's making sure that you're accessible where people expect you to be, making sure that your product is discoverable, but importantly, and I think this is what we were talking about when we were saying we're narrowcasting, it's about creating a community of like-minded, whatever it is, whether it's around a show. For us, it's around BritBox as an idea, right? That's what we create the community around, and then we hope that we can mobilize them. And I think
a brand, do you mean?
No, I actually mean a community, because I think a brand is just one more step. A brand can be a community, but I truly mean a community of folks that like-minded shows. Sometimes it's a group of shows. And sometimes it's more than that.
Well, I think it's great that you're all saying that you want to drop it weekly, because I think that the Netflix thing where you drop it and it all comes out, that actually, things are changing so fast. That actually was great like 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, and now you're getting a lot of kickback from series creators because they work on this thing for a year or two, and then on one day, all 10 episodes drop, and you never hear that person's name again. Right, and Netflix has so many shows, they don't promote it. So when you hear from the people who actually made the show, they're like, "It's great that I got the money. Yeah. It's great that I'm on Netflix, but I had 5 seconds of attention, and now you're on to 10,000 other shows." But if you do drop them weekly, people have a better chance of discovering them. And we like to say that everybody's kind of drowning in content, right? There's so many shows you can watch. If you let them out one a week at a time, as you guys are saying you're doing, you have a better chance of letting people finally discover you. Or is that a thing you're discovering?
For sure. And the other thing I would say is that I think in a way, when Netflix came out, whatever, a decade ago, I think that comparing yourself to Netflix, I think, is a challenge, because, for example, with CBC Gem, our catalog is very unique and specific, whereas Netflix, I don't know if they have 100,000 titles or whatever the number is, but for us, I think what we're leaning towards is trying to position ourselves as a curator of content. So, I think it's a really valuable thing today to have a place you can go that will have a limited but curated selection of content that we think is really valuable and interesting. So I can stand behind every title and explain to you why every title on our service exists, why we acquired every title, why we commissioned every title, and hopefully which audience it's best serving or not serving. And so I think, with the vast amount of content that's out there and entering a streaming service, and then this frustration of, taking a half an hour to discover what you want to watch, how can we be more like a traditional magazine or a traditional curator that, if you think about like film festivals, I think about, what are some examples in other industries that make a lot of sense? So if you think about VIFF and how they have different programming strands, and each of those programming strands, you probably gravitate towards content within those more than others. And I think that is really valuable. It's almost like going back to the traditional linear channel approach, where each channel actually means something, and it's not just about movies or it's not just about comedies, but they have a particular type of comedy that is done on one channel versus another. And to the extent that you can signal that within the streaming service environment so that you're aware of where is my community or where is my home or where is the type of content within the service that appeals to me, I think we're also doing a service of making it easier for people to find the type of content that they would like to see before they have to, go through and search all over the service. So
I would just add that it sort of depends on what the content is. Like we find with the half-hour comedies, we still want to release them all at the same time. Like so Letterkenny's new season coming, next weekend for Canadian Thanksgiving. It's important that we release that all at the same time, and then people can kind of dive into it over a holiday. The same would go for, the December break, the holidays. Like we want to offer like big chunks of content when traditional broadcasters are black, and we just that's an important offering, I think. But like a show like Succession, a drama that like you really want to sink your teeth into, to release that all at the same time would be a disservice to the service. Or to the content. We go day and date, like yourself. We go day and date with HBO, so we really are following their strategy. But I think having a combination of both, recognizing what our partners are doing. They're experimenting. Like HBO has on occasion dropped all at the same time. Vita season 2 from Starz dropped all at the same time. We're picking up some shows from Hulu. They go often at the same time. I think it's important to sort of just watch the audience and depending on what the content is.
Yeah, no, I agree. We find the same thing. We find that there are kinds of shows that are conducive to different drop patterns. Yeah. And you learn, and I also think your audience evolves, right? Like this is I think the other fascinating thing that we're all going to learn. There's audiences that come to you at different stages of your existence, as I'm sure you all do. You all come in and out of services at certain stages of your mood state, and it's hard for us to know what to keep up with, but we try. That's what data is there for.
I think that what you're saying, which is good, is to be open to different patterns, unlike Netflix, which it's never going to vary out of its pattern of dropping everything, whereas you're seeing things where some people are dropping 3 episodes. I think Apple Plus said they're going to experiment with dropping the first 3 and then waiting and then going week by week.
We've done stuff like that. We've done 2 the first week, and some of it, by the way, some of it was because of things like TCA. Right, and so we've had reasons why we've had to do it, but we found it conducive and productive. So you go, okay, maybe we learned something that we didn't intend to.
I think that for people who are consumers and also creators, one of the interesting things that sometimes is not, it's like services are not aware of, is that you have these grand strategies and you have these meetings and you have these plans and basically, again, going back to everybody drowning, that you can release everything once a week if you want to, but for someone else, it's going to end up being bingeable because they didn't catch it for 3 months and now all the episodes are out. So for them, that's a binge. For someone else who's right on top of it, you did it weekly. Because there is excess content, but I think that's a good point to sort of pivot to say like, okay, all this great stuff's available, you can drop it in different ways, but as Fran prepared these notes, she said, how do you turn, this is her words, how do you turn a good story into a great pitch? And I would add, like, I hope it's a great story you're turning into a great pitch instead of just a good story, but what are you looking for people who have created stories and are coming to you and are pitching something for you? What are you looking for?
Authenticity and a one-liner that just makes it easy.
A one-liner.
It is. There's so much content, and I just feel like it's so hard in this day and age. But upfront, if it doesn't feel authentic and it doesn't feel like I understand what you're saying, you've just moved on to the next thing. It is the world. We live in a world of excess.
It's hard to put your finger on it because you sort of know when when it's being pitched. But I would say for Crave, we're really trying to lean more into comedy because we're getting so much premium drama from our partners. Not to say that we don't want to do drama in the future. We would love to, but and so in that comedy space, we're looking, I don't know, like something that probably skews a bit younger. It's a bit of a play with genres, maybe. Like we have this great new show that's coming out called New Eden from 2 really fantastic female comedians in Canada. And it's like a story about a all-female cult. But it's a comedy. It's a dark comedy mockumentary. So it's just this weird mashup of all of these sort of different tropes. And, the creative team, the heart of the team, they are so clever and fantastic, and they've taken the time to kind of work on their writer. They are the driver of that creative. And the same would be for Letterkenny. These really fantastic. We've given them time to kind of work on their own creative content and not be sort of skewed by other influences. And it's hard to pinpoint what that is because when we see it, it just jumps out at us. And then on the doc space, same thing, just sort of a little bit of a, something that you want to gobble up. We've just picked up a series called We're All Going to Die. And, it's a factual series, but about, really leaning into these, sort of natural disasters, or if the bees all die, what does that mean? So it's fact, but we want to lean into the darkness of it, almost like a sci-fi MOW, like the asteroid comes and hits the Earth. What happened to us? So it's quite. It's sort of a different take, a different approach to what you'd find on creative content or on a conventional channel or even specialty channel.
Let me just before I get to you, Gabe. Let me just dive in on circle back to what you said because you have a couple of things. So can you explain the pitch for New Eden, what that was like when you got that for starters, and then I have a follow up on.
Well, I personally didn't take the pitch, but I know Sarah Fowley, the head of our creative team, did on the comedy team. But she knew Ebony Rosen, who had worked on Picnic Face, so she knew and Kayla, and so she had sort of a relationship with them. But also just getting to know their comedy, and they had just such a clear vision of what they wanted to do. Like a very distinctively clear vision. They had a mood board that was just jumped out. It was so colorful. And then sort of Sarah worked with them over time to work on, their writer. It's been shopped around, like it was shopped around into the States. But we didn't go that route. We wanted to bring it back and work in Canada with Canadian talent. And we're super excited about it. We're hoping, it's the same brain trust as the team that helped to develop Letterkenny under the same sort of scenario where we really want to work with Canadian creative talent,
And getting back to Letterkenny, because this gets to the whole original question of we have all these stories we can tell. The world's watching. There are no time zones. You can watch things whenever you want. It struck me that one of the things that I heard when I first came up and people talked about Letterkenny was that you were not going to understand it. It's too Canadian. And I mean, that's literally what people were said. And then I watched it and I laughed my ass off and I was like, I don't get some of it, but it totally translates. So how do you stop yourself from saying, now that you know that you can program everywhere, how do you allow something to be ultra Canadian like that without saying, oh no, the borders are so wide now, we need to be broader? How do you, because the brilliance of Letterkenny is that it's Canadian.
Yeah, I think that's what I wasn't doing a very good job of describing it, but that's what we're trying to really lean into is I think, seeing the fact that it's resonating, outside of its Canadianness is key. And how we do that, I don't know if I can describe that, but I think that is what is critical for us, is we really want to be leaning into that. I would say Jem is doing an awesome job at doing that as well, really fostering Canadian creative talent.
We have we struggle with this a lot because, as many of you will probably know, British comedy doesn't travel all that easily. There's people that will find that right thing, but then it doesn't. But we are very specific about the fact that you have to be something for somebody, and don't try to be an everything for everybody. This is very important in the pitches that we say. It's make sure that you're something for somebody, and what is that? What is that something, and who is that somebody?
Right. I was just going to say, it sort of speaks to what you were saying about the authenticity of that voice, who's telling that story. Jared grew up in a really small town, it was living and breathing that world and just really leaning in. It's very authentic. It's coming from a real place of fun and quirkiness.
Right.
And having the right, talent that are surrounded around him to help build out that story or kind of contain it. You don't meet any parents on Letterkenny.
Right.
You're really just with the guys and their crazy friends and enemies.
And over at Gem, Gabe, what are you looking for? And specifically, because we're talking about Canada, you must be finding a whole new field now of artists.
No, for sure. I think I would agree with both of my colleagues here in terms of authentic voices. And I know that sounds, very trite, but the example is when you hear a story that the writer, creator has lived it, it's lived experience, you can tell. It's not coming from a place of observation from the outside, but rather from deep knowing from the inside. One of the one of the series that we just launched this summer called The 410 is a story by Supinder Rach, who is an actress. She was on Guidestones and she was on Crawford and a bunch of other series, but also had written over a period of a few years a story that was not really deeply personal to her, but it was taking a look at the Sikh community in Brampton, Ontario. And when you first heard the pitch, the first thing you thought was, number one, this is coming from a super authentic, real place. And number two, this is a story I've never heard before, I've never seen before. and it immediately pulls you in. And what's great about this series is that this was, I think, one of the top 5 most watched series that launched on the service. And not only did it appeal to people in the South Asian community, but it was appealing to people, like it's some of people's favorite series that who are not South Asian in Canada. So I would say it's very similar to Letterkenny in the sense that it's telling a very authentic Canadian story, but it's showing a side of Canada that you don't see represented all the time in media. And so I think that, is that story coming from a real place? That's, I think, a huge piece of what I'm looking for, because it will just immediately translate beyond just the community that's been created for.
And Soumya, you have we actually talked about this in LA. You one of your favorite shows, you actually is on your channel. I know that's actually, it was there before you got there, I think, wasn't it? Shetland?
So, well, and because I was there, the channel from the beginning, so it wasn't there. It was,
you went
so
and got it.
Shetland I went and got from, that's correct, from Netflix.
Thank God. Yeah, I'm just being anti-Netflix right now. The thing about Shetland, which is talking about these authentic stories and the sort of surprise in this space, especially the over-the-top space and the streaming space, where things translate that I think would have surprised programmers of yesteryear. Shetland is so completely Scottish, it's sometimes hard to even understand what they're saying without turning the subtitles on, and yet people who watch it are like, oh my God, this is the best show, and I would have never expected this.
I have to tell you the story. So Shetland, when I saw the very first pilot, eons ago, right? I just fell in love with it, and I was like, I'm gonna pick this up. And at that point, it wasn't even. I mean, at that point, our BritBox wasn't even contemplated. I just said, I just want the show. I love the show, and so I brought it to our team that was doing television sales, and they went, the accents are too hard. No one's gonna watch this. And I was like, I don't care. I'm going to watch it. And it was one of those struggles that I had with our internal sales team. And I remember picking up the phone and calling KCET in LA and going, come on, you have to show this, right? Other people are going to want to watch this. And it was one of those like bizarre things, because I didn't understand how everyone else wouldn't want to watch this that I was so taken with. And you're right, you learn eventually, and I'm so happy that it's found this amazing audience in this new world.
Right. And Gaby, you were saying the story that you were just talking about from the Sikh community, a lot of maybe 10 years ago that wouldn't have gotten made.
I think that's probably true, but I think that's one of the benefits where, I can take a risk on a show that doesn't have the same impact that, if someone were commissioning a major series drama on linear and it didn't work, there's a bigger, downside to that than I would have, right? And so I think that that's one of the benefits where we can take more risks and work with stories that may not have gotten that sort of wider opportunity previously.
And for all three of you, just jump in when you want. Like, again, looking for these stories. When someone comes to you and says, "I have this story," I like that you like. Is it something you know really well, rather than you're like making up an FBI story and you're never been in the FBI, so it's personal to you. But what are the things? What's missing in the gaps? What's sort of falling through the cracks that hasn't been seen yet? But you're all three of you are thinking, I can't wait till I get that show pitched, and it hasn't been pitched to me yet.
Well, it's funny. I had a pitch today. I wish I could tell you what it was, but I love this so much. I won't tell you what it is, but I'll say that it's a true story. It happened in Vancouver, and it's unbelievable. And if I told you what it was, I know I'm the worst person to do this, you would say, I cannot wait to watch that. And Cameron Bailey, the head of the Toronto International Film Festival, 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, he wrote a really interesting, important article in the Globe and Mail talking about why Canadian narrative filmmakers aren't telling more stories that aren't just the deeply personal ones about their own lives and self-reflective, and those are all important, but why are they not telling stories about the incredibly true stories that have happened in our country, and sharing those stories? I'm telling you, I'm totally greenlighting this project, by the way. But it goes back to, I think, I can't wait to market this program, because I'll be able to say it's a true story. It happened in Vancouver to 2 Canadians, and it's going to get a ton of PR. I can just already see. I think that's the one takeaway is, as I'm thinking about what to commission, you're thinking about how do you position it in the sea of content, and how do you position it with press and with reviewers so that it taps into the zeitgeist and can get that attention. So I think if something has a true story or a true thing that's happened, it can be a really powerful way to market and to promote it down the road.
It's interesting you say this, because I talk about this all the time, which is there are known genres that work, procedural works, no matter what. Kind of what I'm going to call a warm comedy works, no matter what. A known talent works most of the time. And to your point, a pitch that is accessible to people. But I think that in this new world, and we talk about this internally with my marketing team, our challenge is to say, how do you take a story that's challenging? How do you take something that doesn't have the obvious face, the obvious genre? Can we turn it? It seems like each of you has done something like that. You took the 410, and you were talking about documentaries, and I think that is the privilege we have, and that is also the challenge we have.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't know if you've seen the show on Hulu, Rami.
Yeah.
I love that show. And I feel like, it's the story of a Muslim. It's a comedy, like it's set up as a comedy, but there are major dramatic elements to it. So I'd love to see a Canadianized version of something like that, like a show like Rami. How can we, I don't know, what it is, but I love the way that that's set up. And I think that there's lots of room for stories in that comedy space, I just think that is a great show and a great example of what we could do in Canada. But then there's a whole other piece of what we offer, the theatrically released films. Like, we put money into theatrically released films, which is, there are lots of opportunities in there, and I'm sure a lot of you in the audience are coming from that space, from the feature film. There's in Hollywood as well, like the mid-sized comedy film, has totally disappeared, the rom-com. We're really feeling that on pay, especially. And, the kind of action, male skew, kind of fun action, mid-size film, we're missing that as well in the feature film space.
All the things that used to go to Blockbuster
Yes.
in the olden days.
Exactly.
Rental.
And I mean, Netflix is, they've largely stolen a lot of that, like the rom-com, certainly. They're trying to reboot it and do their own thing, but we really believe still in the theatrical release of films. We think that it is very important, actually, to help market what that film is on our service. And so I think that there's opportunity there.
Will a Kramer versus Kramer ever get made today?
Reboot, right? Just change
We're
it.
making it
As a
actually.
series,
You're making it,
multiple seasons.
So what are you? I hate to say what are you not looking for, but let's say on the positive angle, like you mentioned Rami, and Rami follows a lot of the patterns of other series where it's basically slice of life, but it's particular to a certain person and his lifestyle and beliefs.
Yeah.
The danger in that, when you're especially finding new people, is like, okay, that's a great pilot, but do you have more stories? And how do you tell them? It seems like it's really hard to sort of teach someone how to write a slice of life story, because when you're watching it, it's basically like, oh, you guys walked around town for 20 minutes and not happen, but something does happen, and it takes period over time. So how do you have things? Do you have people in house or rules that when you're talking to new creators and writers, like, I like this idea. Do you know where it's going? And if it's not, can we help you out?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, look, we're fortunate in that we have the entire powerhouse and the development team for ITV and BBC that support us. And we will go out and seek help. We will be like, we have this that we're thinking of commissioning. Can someone help us? Can someone help us find the right teams? And we have our own internal teams that are obviously looking at it deeper, but we will seek help and say, hey, comedy commissioning team at BBC, help us with this. Either figure out the right talent that we can partner this with, or how can we tweak it to get it to your point. I mean, like, you will find these kinds of things, right? You will find either the treatment's perfect, the one-liner's great, and then you look at the script and you go, what just happened? The character didn't live up, right? So there's all of those things, and then you go, now what do I do with it? Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think our team, definitely like our originals creative team, they have put a number of different projects into development, and they set out like goals, to try to reach, like either whether it's like working on a writer's room and coming up with that first script. But there are a number of projects that we have in development of like across both the drama, comedy, and doc space to get projects ready. And that team works across all of our brands, not just Crave. So, they're assessing content that maybe would be good for CTV, but then they realize, actually, you know what? If maybe we could pivot this, and it really is more of an SVOD product. Like, I only work on Crave, but that team is across all the brands and is able to assess and work with the creators to really sort of help them hone their projects for the channel or the product that they're working it for.
Yeah, it's similar with us in that we're very integrated with all the content areas within CBC. So whether it's drama, comedy, or on the unscripted side or doc side. And so, projects can come in different ways. The things that we look at primarily for original commissioning tend to be more in the young adult, new adult space, and mid-form, shorter form content. But we also have done and probably will do more 1 hour dramas, but usually in collaboration with our drama team in-house.
We have about 6.5 minutes before we get to the audience questions. They get about 10 minutes of questions. But I want to ask, like, for a pitch, you said you want like a kind of a one-liner, but that must be hard. I mean, because I could come to you and say, I want to do something on zombie cops, which you would totally get, right? It's like zombie and cops. That's easy. But what about something that's more complex? I mean, beyond just. I guess what I'm saying is, do you want somebody to pitch to you and let them take 1 minute to do it, or can they sit there and explain it to you, or are you saying in the middle of the explanation they don't know what this show is?
I mean, to me, when you say zombie cops, that's not a one-liner. That's a log line, and I don't want a log line. I mean, and it is a little bit more than that, right? Like, because I am looking to see, and we talk about this. Is there an arc? Is there a narrative? Is there an actual reason to be? Right, and there's times in the past, as you always say, there's some. I'm sure you've all seen this. You sometimes sit and you go, why did this movie have to be animated? Right? There's things like that and that's where you go. You look at something and you go, why does this have to exist in the format that you are? Is it just contrived? You took something that was existing and just tweaked it. By the way, sometimes that's fine if you can find an authentic twist to that. But usually, I think that's the important thing to get past.
So we have Bell Media, the website, has a link into the Crave guidelines that sort of lays it all out. Like, what are we looking for? Who do you contact? What do you have to submit? And it is very detailed. The Crave producer guidelines, and there are guidelines for all of our different channels, actually. So it lays it out. But, like, I think, and then, it's sent to the right teams to sort of assess properly. I think a key part for making Canadian content, we need to have a bit of a sense of how you're going to put all the financing pieces together, like, understanding that and knowing, how much you want us to contribute to it. That's as important as the idea itself, like, how realistic is it that we'll be able to make it. We can't make another Game of Thrones. Don't try. So, like, so those pieces are all taken into consideration.
Yeah, similarly, so cbc.ca/independent producers, you can find what Gem is looking for specifically, but also other content areas as well. And the other thing I would just add that we think a lot about what's the format that is best going to tell the story. So oftentimes someone comes in with an idea for an hour drama, and the drama team will say, well, this is really a more contained story that probably could be done in a different format, and they will send it over to us to look at, and maybe we want to do it as a short form series. There have been times where we say, well, could this be better told as a podcast or vice versa? And so for us, we really try to think about what's the best format to telling the story, and there's a process that we think about that. So it could come in one format, but then evolve. The 410, the project started as a 10 by 10 web series. Then it turned into a 25 by, or I should say a 3 by 25. So 3.5 hours. So almost like a film with 3 chapters. And so that's the first time we've really done something like that. But we're open to really being innovative about how do we, without having the same time constraints as broadcast, how do we play with times of episodes to tell the story the way that it makes the most sense?
Do you usually find people are open to that, like to do something untraditional, like you said, 3.5 hours, or like you might get a great thing that they wanted to run as a like a ongoing drama, and you might think, this is actually a limited series, like 10 episodes or 8 episodes is the best way.
Totally, and I mean sometimes it's based on what the financing is as well, right? Can they finance something at that level? But more than ever, we're having a lot of back and forth and flexibility in terms of something starting as a 12-minute episode and then becoming a half hour when they can bring on another U.S. partner as an example, and they want to change the scope of the series. Origami, a series that we did with the CW, it's for us it's a 10 by 10, but they wanted it in a feature film format. They just liked it better that way, and so they actually re-edited it as a film. And so you're really just seeing a lot of flexibility in how programs are changing their nature.
Excellent. All right, well, I think we have some microphones to go around so that people have questions. There's a woman right up there. She's eager. He's coming right behind you.
Hi there, my name is Jolie. I'm just wondering, when someone pitches an idea for you, how packaged do you want it to be? Do you want people to come with a great showrunner attached, maybe a star name? Or if it's just a brilliant idea, is that enough for you to take it into the wings and make it something? I just wonder, because sometimes you guys want to be a part of that process, and sometimes you want people to come to you with a great package.
I mean, I can say for us,
Thank you.
it would depend on the project itself and the gaps that we have, right? So there are projects right now that we would say we're completely okay thinking about it because it's about, we would only consider it 3 years out, so we can work with you to say who could the showrunner be, how would we do it. But there are yet other things you would look at it and go, this would only fit in this schedule or whatever gap that we have. And hence, it needs to be much more packaged than it is, or even finished.
So check out our producer guidelines, the Crave producer guidelines. We want, for the films that we pick up, we want them to be fairly well packaged. Like, you have your final script, you have an idea of all of your financing, you have a producer on board. So we're coming in pretty late, before you've started shooting principal. And the same goes, well, actually, we've pivoted with the doc features as well. Now we're getting in a little bit earlier with the doc features. So an idea, but a sense of who your producer is. We need to have a full finance plan. And then with series, no, we come in we work, as I mentioned, on development as well. So check those out on the Bell Media site, because it gets pretty detailed about what we need and what you can submit with.
Yeah, it's the same with us. I would just check the the cbc.ca/independent producers for that.
The gentleman up in the middle.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I have a pretty boisterous voice. My name is Patrick P.H. Hampton. I'm from here now, just moved here, in L.A. I have a TV show in development with Buffalo Wake Productions, so it helps out a little bit more, and also distribution has been changing dramatically on the platform. So my question right now, with the writer's strike going on still, what is the stance of protection to the talent? Because even Netflix is hiring narrative designers, and we're seeing the ecosystem of understanding the zeitgeist is more pertinent to creating and retaining your viewers. And if you can comment on that, that'd be helpful.
I'm not sure I understand the question. I don't
Okay,
know if
what
it's
do you-
relevant to us. Sorry, go ahead, Patrick.
Well, what are you guys doing to protect the talent that's developing, that's coming out, that is showing it up, that's in the culture? Because somebody that's been coming up naturally and been working on the business side and also the talent side of things, I've seen this great disconnection through understanding of access and then also entitlement. One thing about it is now working with people like Badass, Black Toven, and I'm part of DPG, the Dog Pound Gang, is that we have a lot of content coming up that's local and that's being like highly wanted, but then still it's getting molded out through the conversations. And then when we have direct situations, it's getting overpowered by the entitlement of the people in the positions. So my questioning now is development-wise, how do we have access to properly present our material?
It's difficult, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say working with a producer would be ideal, rather than coming to us with as a writer, and so that would be maybe my main piece of advice there.
I mean, for us, look, because we go through mostly the UK systems that are fairly well established, and I think you're right. Look, there is a challenge for a world in which you are yet again getting to where there will be aggregators of sorts. We live in a world that became highly disaggregated a few years ago, and we're going back into re-aggregation of sorts, right? And I think that each of us is going to learn what that means. Sorry, it's not a...
Challenging.
This gentleman right here. You can raise your hand if you have a question. We'll track you down.
Thanks, I appreciate it. The television market has become increasingly global over the past decades, and yet you're talking very much about having Canadian-specific content. How much are you looking for content that is specific just to the Canadian market and will succeed just in the Canadian market? And how much do you envision programming that you can find additional distribution channels for globally?
Very good question. I would say, Crave is only in Canada today, but Bell Media is interested, of course, in finding ways to develop content that will travel worldwide and having sort of the back end piece of some of the original series that we're doing. So right now we're sort of trying to balance those needs, because certainly on the theatrical film side, it's so expensive. Like all of you, I'm sure any of you in theatrical film, there are so many different partners that have to come on board in order to get those films to be made. So we recognize that, and we acknowledge that we are one of many partners. I wowould say it really depends on what the series is and whether we will contribute more and take more of a back end. It depends. The appetite is there for sure.
I think the scary part is we live in a world where budgets have actually also gone up quite dramatically.
Exactly.
Right. So if you think about it, not so long ago, you could get a UK show that was entirely funded out of the UK. Now the shows are getting co-funded by commissioners around the world, and hence, look, I think what that has brought on is some amazing production values, amazingly different stories, and people have taken chances, but it's shifted some other things.
I mean, I would say I don't see that as a dichotomy or as Canadian stories don't travel. I think Schitt's Creek with the 3 Emmy nominations, Working Moms, global Netflix deal, and with the 4th most binge show in the world on Netflix. We have a lot of examples of our stories traveling, and I think that, you know, if you look at even our slate of Gem originals that we've launched in the last 6 to 8 months, many of them and many coming up all have international partners. So Hulu, we have a show with them coming up. CW, we've worked with NBC Universal on another. So I don't think being a uniquely Canadian story means that it's only relevant to Canadians. I think if it's told well and is told with a unique lens, that it can carry far beyond our borders, which we've seen examples of.
Yeah, we really want that to happen. We celebrate it. Thank you to Tim in helping do that on your side.
Well, there's great stuff. I mean, I would just there's one up there. Go ahead. No, you go. I talked too much. Go.
I have a mic. Just
someone has a mic.
hi.
Go ahead.
Do you mind if I ask a quick
Sure.
question?
Yeah, do it.
I am an actor, and I'm looking at developing my own projects. And I'm just curious: do you often have actors coming with shows that they want to be in, or as part of the show in the development, or do you see that? How do you encourage that?
Good question.
I would say if you're putting on a producer's hat, then yes. I mean, the 410 is actually an actress and the writer and creator of a project. So if you're writing and creating a project, certainly. But what I would say is, for sure, you want to find a producer to work with who is able to do the broadcaster speak or the streaming service speak. And I think you'll actually put your project in a better light if you come with a producer attached to it.
Thank you.
In our case, I mean, Sean Pye, who's an amazing stand-up comic and who's in so many shows that you'll recognize him from, but he had his own story, which is what There She Goes is about. But he's not in it. He's just an amazing showrunner for it.
There's a woman in the back who has a mic. So
Hi.
yeah.
I have a question about music and song in TV. I feel like non-traditional shows that aren't traditionally musicals, not those, like regular shows, that are incorporating a lot more music and song into them. I feel like we're seeing a lot more of that. Is that something you guys actively look for? Do you see it develop along the way, or how do you guys feel about that?
That's a good question. I mean, one of our upcoming series called Utopia Falls is the creator and writer of that project is RT, a famous Canadian music video director. And music is an incredibly important part of that series. Boy Wanda, who's the musical producer and musical director on that project, again, he's written for Drake and The Weeknd and all these artists, and that's very much a young adult skewing show, and it's going to be really bringing the music as a secondary character of the show. And so especially when you're looking at appealing to younger audiences, the way you can authentically bring music and incorporate that into the storytelling is a huge benefit.
Yeah, I agree absolutely. Like in terms of the creation of the content, like music brings an extra wonderful element to it, especially because we have so much talent in Canada. I'll also say, Bell Media, our CEO comes from music. He comes from Universal Music. And so he certainly has been supporting like a number of different projects, like The Launch, for example, that sort of support and talk about the music industry. So I think it's a key part of any kind of content that you're creating. Absolutely.
I love that we have this little flashing red light there that tells us we're out of time. But let's give a round of applause for our panel today. And maybe you can catch them in the lobby if you have extra questions. Thank you for coming.
Yeah.